There is a man sitting somewhere right now. He is not young. He is not where he thought he would be. He has watched younger men pass him. He has sat in rooms where nobody asked his opinion. He has carried the quiet weight of a life that looked, from the outside, like it did not quite work out. He does not say any of this out loud. Men like him never do. But in the silence, in the early morning before anyone else is awake, in the car alone, in the mirror before he puts the face back on, he asks the same question he has been asking for years. Is it too late for me? He does not ask it dramatically. He does not ask it with tears or with rage. He asks it the way a man asks a question he has already half accepted the answer to. Quietly. Almost matter-of-factly. The way you check a wound that has been there long enough that you have stopped expecting it to heal. This video is for that man. And the answer is no. But not in the soft, comforting, motivational poster way you have heard before. Not in the way that makes you feel better for 10 minutes and then disappears when real life walks back into the room. The answer is no in a harder, older, more permanent way. The kind of no that does not require your feelings to cooperate. The kind of no that does not depend on your circumstances improving or your confidence returning or the world suddenly deciding to give you a second look. The kind of no that was decided before you were born. God does not specialize in the early starter. He does not specialize in the man who had it together at 25 and built steadily and arrived exactly on schedule. That man exists. God loves that man. But that man is not who God is famous for. God is famous for the impossible case. The man everyone had already written off. The man standing at the edge of what looked like the end of his story. The man with nothing left but breath and whatever is still burning in his chest, that he cannot explain and cannot extinguish no matter how many years pass, and no matter how many times life tried to put it out. That is the man God specializes in. And if you are 50 and still here, and still carrying that unexplainable burning, you are exactly that man. What nobody tells you about being overlooked. The world has a timeline. It is unspoken, but everybody knows it. By 30, you should have direction. By 40, you should have momentum. By 50, you should have arrived. The timeline is not written anywhere official. Nobody handed it to you on a piece of paper. But it lives in every conversation, every comparison, every room you walk into, where you can feel the quiet calculation people are running on you without saying a word. And when a man reaches 50 and has not arrived, when the momentum stalled, when the direction shifted, when life applied pressure in ways no timeline ever accounted for, the world does something quiet and devastating. It stops expecting anything from him. Not loudly. Nobody calls you and says, "We have given up on you." It happens slowly, in the texture of everyday life, in the way people talk to you, in the questions they stop asking, in the opportunities that go to younger men without explanation or apology, in the meetings where your presence is tolerated, but your input is no longer sought, in the eyes of people who used to believe in you that now carry a different look. Not cruelty, just recalibration. The world decided where you fit and quietly stopped leaving room for anything more. And the most dangerous thing about that is not what the world thinks. It is what you start to think. Because a man who is overlooked long enough begins to do the world's job for it. He starts writing his own limitations into the script of his life. He starts hearing the silence as verdict. He starts mistaking the world's low expectations for accurate assessment. He begins to believe that the life still possible for him is smaller than the life he once imagined. He manages down. He adjusts. He lowers the ceiling inch by inch, until it sits just above his head, and he stops noticing that he is no longer standing straight. And he calls it maturity. He calls it acceptance. He calls it wisdom. He calls it being realistic. But some of it is not wisdom. Some of it is surrender wearing a wise man's clothes. Some of it is a man who was built for more quietly making peace with less, because the gap between where he is and where he was supposed to be became too painful to keep looking at directly. And God will not accept that surrender. Not at 50. Not from you. Not after everything it took to get you here still breathing and still carrying that thing in your chest that refuses to die. The men God chose when nobody else would you need to understand something about the way God works. Not as theology, not as Sunday morning comfort, as pattern, as observable consistent method that runs through every story worth telling. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it, and it will permanently change the way you read your own life and your own timeline. God has a consistent habit throughout all of recorded history. He waits. He lets the world form its conclusions about a man. He lets the human timeline pass. He lets the doors close, and the seasons change, and the opportunities go elsewhere, and the crowd move on to someone younger and more promising and more conventionally ready. He lets the man's own doubt build. He lets the silence stretch until it feels permanent. He lets it all happen. And then he shows up. Abraham was 75 years old when God called him to leave everything he had ever known and walk into something completely new. Not 25 when his body was strong and his future was open. Not 35 when he still had decades of prime years ahead of him. Not even 50. 75. A man who by every human calculation had already lived his life, whose story was already written in the minds of everyone around him, whose contribution was assumed to be complete, whom nobody was watching for anything new. God looked at that man and said, "Now, you are ready now. The mission I created you for begins now." Moses was 80 years old before the work he was born to do finally began. He had spent 40 years as a prince, learning the ways of power, and 40 years as a fugitive in the desert, learning humility and patience, and the kind of dependence on God that comfort never teaches. By the time God spoke to him from the burning bush, Moses had failed publicly, fled in shame, hidden himself in obscurity, and rebuilt a quiet, ordinary life that nobody expected anything remarkable from. The world had completely and thoroughly forgotten him. God had not forgotten him for a single day. Joseph spent years in a prison for a crime he did not commit. Not weeks, not months, years. In darkness and in chains, in a place that looked from every possible angle, like the end of the story that God had shown him in a dream when he was young. Every day in that prison was a day that could have extinguished the vision. Every day was evidence, by human logic, that what God had promised was not coming. It was coming. The prison was not the punishment. The prison was the classroom. David spent years running through caves and wilderness hiding from a king who wanted him dead. He had already been anointed. God had already chosen him. The crown was already his by divine declaration. And yet the years between the anointing and the throne were years of isolation, danger, doubt, and hiddenness that would have broken a man who did not understand that preparation and punishment can look identical from the inside. Do you see the pattern? Every man God used for something significant spent time in a place that the world, and sometimes the man himself, interpreted as the end, as failure, as evidence that the promise was not real, or that the window had closed, or that the calling had been rescinded. None of those places were the end. Every single one of them was the preparation room, the place where the man was being built into someone capable of carrying what God was about to place in his hands. The place where everything that needed to die was dying, so that what needed to live could live without competition. And this is not the exception. This is the method. This is how God has always worked, and how He is working right now in your life, whether it feels like preparation or abandonment. The cave you have been living in is not your grave. It is your classroom, and you are closer to graduation than you think. What the years actually built in you. Here is what a 50-year-old man carries, that a 25-year-old man does not have, and cannot buy, and cannot fake, and cannot accelerate, no matter how talented he is or how hard he works. He has been tested in the actual world, with actual stakes and actual consequences. Not in the theoretical sense, not in the practice round. In the game where the losses were real, and the pain was real, and the cost was paid in years, and relationships and sleep and peace of mind. Life has come at him with weight the young man has not yet felt. He has carried grief. He has carried financial pressure that had no clean solution. He has carried the specific weight of watching something he built fail. He has navigated betrayal from people he trusted completely. He has made decisions under pressure so heavy that there was no good option, only the least bad one. He has survived mornings that the young man does not yet know are coming. And every single one of those things, everyone, built something in him that cannot be built any other way. The problem is, he does not experience it as building. He lived it as breaking. He felt each loss as subtraction, not construction. He processed each failure as evidence against himself, not as material, being added to his foundation. So he is sitting on top of decades of forged capacity, real, rare, extraordinary capacity, that he does not recognize as capacity, because it arrived through pain instead of through visible progress. But God sees exactly what those years produced. He sees the patience that only comes from waiting for answers that did not arrive on your schedule, the steadiness that only comes from absorbing chaos over and over without finally collapsing, the depth of character that only comes from suffering that had no comfortable resolution and no clean ending, the discernment that only comes from being deceived enough times to finally understand people accurately, the compassion that only comes from having been broken yourself, the wisdom that only comes from being catastrophically wrong enough times to finally understand what true looks like. You cannot learn those things at 25. You cannot download them or rush them or produce them through ambition or intelligence. They are earned exclusively through time under weight, through decades of showing up when it was hard and continuing when it was unrewarded and enduring when it was silent. You have all of that. That is not a small thing. That is not a consolation prize for missing the earlier window. That is the specific and irreplaceable qualification for exactly what God is about to ask of you. The young man has energy and potential. You have something worth more than both of those things combined. You have proof. You have a track record of survival that no amount of talent can manufacture. You have been in the fire, and you are still here. That is the credential God is looking for. Not your youth, not your perfect timing, your proven endurance. The lie you have been believing. There is a lie that settles into a man somewhere in his late 40s, if he is not careful. It does not arrive with noise or drama. It does not announce itself as a lie. It arrives dressed as reasonable, as evidence-based, as the mature and honest conclusion of a man who has lived long enough to know how things work. The lie is this: the fact that it has not happened yet is proof that it will not happen. That is not wisdom. That is the enemy using your own history as a weapon against your future. The lie is patient. It waits until you are tired. It waits until you have tried something specific and watched it not work the way you hoped. It waits until the gap between where you are and where you expected to be is wide enough to feel structural rather than circumstantial. And then it speaks in the most reasonable voice it can find. Look at the evidence, it says. Look at how long it has been. Look at what has not materialized. Look at the doors that stayed closed. Look at the prayers that seemed to go unanswered. Look at the years that passed without the breakthrough. Maybe this is simply who you are. Maybe the vision was never real. Maybe you were wrong about yourself all along. That voice sounds like wisdom. It sounds like a man finally being honest with himself after years of delusion. It sounds like maturity. It is not maturity. It is surrender with a sophisticated argument, because the evidence does not say what the lie claims it says. The evidence says, you are still here. The evidence says that after everything that tried to finish you, every failure, every loss, every season of silence, every door that did not open, something in you is still burning. The evidence says you are watching this video at 50, asking a question that a man who had truly given up would not still be asking. Dead fires do not produce heat. Dead visions do not keep a man awake. You are not finished. The burning is the evidence. Hold on to it. What God needs from you right now. This is the part that costs something, because everything before this point is true and important and necessary, but it is also incomplete without this. God specializes in the 50-year-old nobody believed in. But the 50-year-old God specializes in is not a passive man. He is not a man who receives this truth and nods and feels better and goes back to the same quiet surrender dressed as acceptance. He is a man who does something with what he now knows. He decides. There is a decision available to you right now that was not available to you at 30. You could not have made it then, because you did not yet have what you have now. The weight was not yet heavy enough to have produced what it produced. The breaking had not yet built what it built. You were not yet the man this decision requires. You are now. The decision is to take every year of surviving, every scar from the breaking, every hard lesson from the failing, every ounce of depth and patience and wisdom and endurance that the difficult decades built, and aim it, deliberately, intentionally, without apology for arriving at this moment later than you planned. Not scatter it across regret for the years behind you. Not waste it apologizing for being late to a timeline that was never God's timeline to begin with. Not spend it looking backward at what should have happened differently. Aim it forward, at the thing that has been waiting, at the work you set down when life got heavy and never fully picked back up, at the version of yourself you stopped believing in because the world stopped believing in you, at the purpose that the cave years were preparing you for. God does not need your youth. He needed your formation, and your formation required exactly the decades you lived exactly the way you lived them. The weight you carry is not your problem. It is your preparation. The years you see as delay are the years that built the man capable of doing what comes next. The breaking you survived is the precise credential for the assignment that is still ahead of you. But you have to decide. Not feel your way into it. Not wait until confidence returns or circumstances improve or the timing feels perfect. Decide now with what you have from where you are. Because the men God used never felt ready. Abraham did not feel ready at 75. Moses did not feel ready at 80. They decided to obey before the feeling of readiness ever arrived. And the readiness came, not before the decision, but because of it. Close. There is a man sitting somewhere right now. He has been overlooked. He has been written off quietly by the people and systems and timelines that decided he had already had his chance. He has carried weight that nobody fully saw and survived, breaking that nobody fully understood, and endured silence that nobody fully appreciated. He has arrived at 50 with wounds and wisdom and a burning in his chest that he cannot explain and cannot extinguish. He does not know that God has been watching him the entire time, not watching with disappointment at what he did not become, watching with intention toward what he is still becoming, watching the way a craftsman watches something that is almost ready, watching the way a builder watches a foundation that has been quietly curing under decades of pressure and is now stronger than anything built on easier ground could ever be. The world looked at that man and wrote a conclusion. God looked at that man and saw a beginning. God does not specialize in the man who made it look easy. He does not specialize in the man who arrived on time and impressed everyone and moved through life without the kind of breaking that leaves marks. He specializes in the man who went through everything that should have finished him, and somehow, by grace and grit and a refusal he cannot fully explain, did not get finished. He specializes in the man who made it through anyway. That is you. The window is not closed. The mission was not canceled while you were in the cave. The burning in your chest at 50 is not nostalgia for something that will never happen. It is not the ghost of a younger man's dream haunting you with what could have been. It is instruction. It is direction. It is the same voice that found an 80-year-old man standing alone in a desert in front of a burning bush after 40 years of hiddenness and obscurity, and said to him, "I have not forgotten you. I have been here the entire time. The work I created you for is not behind you. It is in front of you. Take off your shoes. You are standing on holy ground. And it is time."